Hello, welcome to Z Marie Design. Let's upcycle men's ties into a chic purse. Here's a list of supplies. So let's get started. To get started, you're going to remove the tie tack and all of the stitching from the backs of your ties. And you're going to open those up and press them flat and remove any of the interfacing that's on the inside. Now, two of the ties you won't do this procedure to. You're going to set those aside and use those for your handles. If the interfacing won't come out, just cut it off. Now, the points of each of your ties, you're going to cut those off, and we will use those a little later in the project. So just set those aside for now. So press all of those ties open, and next you will take some lightweight fusible interfacing. And you're going to fuse those to the back sides of all of your ties. And just follow your manufacturer's instructions on how to attach your fusible interfacing, but just make sure to lift your iron as you go to prevent any wrinkles. Now that all of my ties have been opened and all of my fusible removed, I've ironed on all of my lightweight fusible. It's time to move on to preparing my foundation fabric. So my purse pattern is cut 16.5 by 16.5. You can make it larger or smaller. And I'm going to cut my foundation fabric just out of some lightweight muslin. And then I'm also going to use that fusible interfacing and fuse that to the back side of my muslin. And I'm going to cut two of those, one for the front and one for the back. And I'm just piecing my fusible to make sure that my entire muslin pattern piece is covered. Next, I'll select my first tie, and I'm going to line it up with the edge of my pattern there, and I'm going to place it down face up, right side's facing up, and I'm going to stitch on both sides to about 1/8 of an inch from the edge to attach it to my foundation piece. Next, I'm going to select my second tie, and I'm going to put it right sides facing, making sure that it'll have a little overhang on the top and on the bottom of that muslin. And I'm going to pin that in place, and then I will sew that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Then I'm going to fold that over toward the muslin, and I'm going to press that over. Take my next tie, just cutting off a little bit there. You don't have to cut out the entire pattern just yet. Take my next tie, and I'm going to, same thing, put it right sides facing. Pin it in place, so 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now my entire piece of my muslin foundation fabric is almost completely covered. I have one last tie to attach, right sides facing. Pin it in place, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I make sure to press in between each one of those ties that I stitched. I also cut my ties about 2.5, 3.5 inches wide, because not all ties come in the same size. So now that my foundation piece is completely covered, I'm going to press that last tie, and I'm going to do a stay stitch right at the edge of the foundation piecing, making sure that that one is tacked down. And this is what it'll look like from the back and from the front. And remember, you're going to do two of those. And next, I'm going to use that foundation pattern as my pattern to cut out and remove any of the excess tie pieces that are hanging off the edge. I'm cutting my notches there at the bottom of the pattern piece, 2 inches by 2 inches, and that's what I'm going to be boxing my purse corners with. I just find it easier to go ahead and cut out my notches now when it's time to box those corners. I'll show you that procedure a little later in the project. So this is one panel all done, front and back side. Now those pieces that we cut off, those end pieces that we cut off of the other ties, this is what we're going to do with those. Since we removed the tie tack from the back, there's an opening there. So each of those, you will take those and turn it on the back side, and you're going to stitch a zigzag stitch, or you can hand stitch this part closed on each of those end pieces of the ties. And now we're going to do and place that at the top of our bag, and I'm just going to place those right sides up, and I'm going to line those up. I think I used 4 of these for each of my panels. I don't start directly at the side seam. I'm going to give myself about a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side and just line those up. I made sure that mine were all touching. You don't have to, you can leave a space in between if you like. And then I just, on those side seams, I sew a blind hem stitch or a zigzag stitch, or you can sew a blanket stitch, whichever you prefer. And you'll do that on each of the sides, and you'll do that at the top. Now I didn't do it at the bottom. I wanted my point pieces at the bottom. I wanted that to not be sewn down. That's what it looks like from the back. And you'll do that on both of your panels, on the front and on the back side. And then just trim those off. Next, we'll move on to our handles. Those are the 2 ties that you kept aside for your handles. I'm going to do a zigzag stitch to tack that piece down in the back, that center seam. I cut my ties at 24 inches by the width of the tie, the smaller section of the tie. And to place my ties on my purse, on my panels there, I'm going to find the center of one of my panels, and then I'll find the center of the next quarter part of the panel. And then I'll do the same for the other part of the panel, find the center of that quarter piece, and that's where I will place my handles. So when your purse is hanging on your shoulders, this is how your handles will be. And then now to attach them, flip your handles back so that they are laying on top of your panel, and pin them in place where your markings are. Now I haven't cut off my little point there, so I just line it up at the top edge of each of the panels. Pin it in place, and I'm going to do a stay stitch. Now to attach the second part of the handle on the other panel, line the panel up with one another so that I can find my placement. Again, when my bag is hanging on my shoulders, my handles will be like this, and then I just flip them over. I do this procedure when I'm putting it on, just to make sure that my handles don't get twisted. Then I'm just pinning it in place, take it to the sewing machine and do a stay stitch. I just do the stay stitch so that the handles can stay on until I sew the panels together. Now that your handles are stay stitched on, it's time to put your bag together. You're going to take each of your bag panels and you're going to place them right sides facing. Match up your top seam, your bottom seams, and your side seams. So I'm going to match my side seams, pin those in place. Match my other side seam and pin that in place. and then match my bottom seams. Pin that in place, and then you will sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance here on your side seam, your bottom seam, and your other side seam, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. The next step is to press all of those seams open. It'll make it easier for the next step when we box our corners. So press all of those seams open, making sure to give it a lot of steam. To box those corners now, you're going to bring your side seam up to meet the bottom seam. Match those two seams, pin it in place. And again, sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Do the same thing to the other side. Match your side seam to your bottom seam. Make sure to press those seams open. It just helps to reduce the bulk when we turn our bag right side out. Again, sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. Once you sew your 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're going to trim that seam to about 1/4 inch. And now the main body of your bag is all done. We've trimmed our boxed corners. Our handles are attached. Make sure that your handles aren't twisted. If they are, this is the time for you to make those changes. I'm just trimming off that little triangle piece there that I didn't trim before. Turn the main body of your bag right side out, making sure to push those corners out. And this is what it should look like at this point. Next, let's move on to preparing the lining part of our bag. So for the lining part of our bag, I'm going to cut with my same pattern piece, 16.5 by 16.5. I'm going to cut 2 of this lightweight cotton fabric. And I'm also going to make some pockets on both sides of those panels. My pockets measure 7 inches by 6 inches. And you're going to cut 2 of each of those, 2 for each pocket. Next, this is my magnetic snap set. It comes in a set of 4, a daddy, a mommy, a brother, and a sister, which are your washers, and a piece of interfacing. So to prepare your pockets, you're going to cut 2 pieces for each pocket. My cell phone just fits perfectly in this 6 by 7 inch. You can make these pockets larger if you like. So put these pocket pieces, you're going to put them right sides facing, pin them in place, and then you're going to leave an opening, about 2 to 3 inch opening for turning. Sew all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you've sewn around and you've cut all of your corners, and you turn your pocket right side out, you top stitch the top. And then I find the center of my bag panel and the center of my pocket, and I measure down 3 inches, and I put the top part of my pocket down, pin it in place, and sew around the 3 sides. And then you'll catch that opening that you left once you sew around. Now you've attached your magnetic snap, which I measure down 1.5 inches. I'll leave a link in the description on how to put that magnetic snap in. You'll be able to have a nicer close-up of how to insert it. So now let's go ahead and sew our bag pattern together, our lining pattern together. You're going to pin your side seams, and then you're going to mark that bottom seam, leaving an opening of about 3 to 4 inches for turning. And then you'll sew each of those seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure to leave that opening. Press those seams open, and then move on to boxing those corners. Remember, your side seam meets up with your bottom seam. Match those open seams, pin it in place. So 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides, trimming it to a 1/4 inch after you sew it. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end of each of these seams. Now that our lining bag is all done, it's all sewn, you still have your opening there. That's for turning the bag right side out. You'll leave your lining bag right side out, but the main body of your bag is turned right side out, but the lining part of your bag is inside out. So next step is to place the main body of your bag. You're going to place it inside the lining so that right sides are facing. Making sure that when you put it inside that your handles are also inside the lining. So the lining is wrong side out, main body of your bag is right side out. Match your side seams first, making sure that those seams are pressed open. Pin those side seams in place. On both sides. Then I match my center seams next and I pin those in place. And then I bind my handles, pin at the handles, and then fill in any parts of the pins that I need to fill in after that. This is what it looks like when it's all pinned together. Take this to your machine and you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around the top opening there of your bag, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now that the top part of your bag is all sewn together, you're going to turn the bag right side out through the opening, through the lining. And when you're turning your bag right side out, just take your time, bringing your main part of your bag, bringing it through that opening. Once the main body of your bag is turned right side out, turn your lining right side out, and make sure then to push out all of those box corners. I again check my handles to make sure that they are turned the right way. The next step then is to close that opening on the lining. I turn that seam allowance under. I give it a press here again, and then I just stitch it closed. You can do this by hand or you can do this by machine. And just stitch your opening there. Just stitch it closed. And now the opening is now all stitched together. You're going to push the lining inside the main body of the bag. And we're almost done. One more step left. So once you push your lining inside the main body of the bag, you're going to press down that lining so that it doesn't show from the front side. And then you'll pin it in place after you press it down. I give it a lot of steam at this point. And then I pin all the way around the top opening of my bag. The next step after you get everything all pinned in place, you will take it to your machine and you're going to do a top stitch. Now whenever I do my top stitching on my bags, I increase my stitch length to 3.0 up to 3.5. You can also use a decorative stitch at this point. And I pin it in place because I don't want that lining to show from the front. And I top stitch about a 1/2 inch from the top. By top stitching a 1/2 inch down, I can avoid going over a lot of that bulk that's at the top from my ties too. But I'm still securing my lining in place. And you're all done. This is what your unique chic upcycled men's tie purse will look like. So the top part of the ties, I like that look where they're not pinned down, they're not sewn down, they're free. It's fully lined, you have pockets inside, you have the magnetic snap for closure and security. You even utilized your handles as upcycled ties. It's just a unique look, and it's a great keepsake, a great memory. If you wanted to remember someone, great way to honor them. And you see how the bottom of the ties are free? They're not sewn down. I just think it gives it a unique look. So I hope you like this project, and I hope you'll give it a try. A great way to reduce your carbon footprint, and a great upcycle project. So thanks for watching.